Tonight, remembering Ed Broadbent and a political legacy that helped shape this country. Tributes to the longtime NDP leader and a respected political fighter.
He never stopped caring about people. He is someone that I'll always remember.
Plus, at issue on his enduring influence on Canadian politics. Donald Trump lashes out and goes on the attack in the courtroom.
This is an out-of-control Attorney General. She's totally out of control.
And from stun guns to switchblades, CBC News finds illegal weapons just a click away on Amazon.
I was absolutely shocked.
This is The National with Chief Correspondent Adrienne Arsenault.
Thanks for joining us. We begin with breaking news. The United States and the United Kingdom tonight launched military strikes on Iran-backed Houthi militants in Yemen. UK Ministry of Defense released this video tonight of its fighter jets taking off from nearby Cyprus before carrying out multiple precision strikes on Houthi military targets in Yemen. Those strikes happened with the support of several allies, including Canada, and they're in response to weeks of escalating attacks on commercial ships in the Red Sea. Attacks the Houthis say are in support of Hamas in its war with Israel. Sasha Petrusik is tracking this breaking news for us tonight. So, Sasha, can you take us through what we know so far?
Yeah, Adrienne, there have been a series of strikes in the western end of Yemen controlled by the militant group, the Houthis. What we have seen is strikes against weapons depots, against bases from which various weapons have been fired into the shipping lanes. The Americans have been using planes, have been using ships, have been using submarines to fire at these bases, and lots of explosions all over. Canada has played a role here as well, along with a number of other countries, but we don't know exactly what role that is. They're simply saying that the same thing that everybody else is saying, that this was led by the British and by the Americans, and the British are saying that Canada played a non-operational role.
So, Sasha, from the very beginning of the Israel-Hamas conflict, this added anxiety has been about whether this war would expand. You know, lots of talk about how far the axis of resistance, those militias supported by Iran, will go. So what is the potential effect of these strikes tonight?
Well, first of all, the Houthi are already saying that they're not afraid of a confrontation with the United States, and they are vowing to even up the game now and to fire more at ships and at the U.S. military. Beyond that, the U.S. has been worried. That's why they've been waiting for the past week, hoping that this was going to calm down, because if the Houthi, who are very well equipped by Iran, if they decide to up the game, and if other militias in the region, not just Hamas and Hezbollah in Lebanon, but others in Iraq and in Syria, if those groups that are backed and funded by Iran decide that they are going to launch all-out attacks on Israel, for instance, then things really will escalate.
Absolutely. All right, Sasha Petrusik in Toronto.
My pleasure.
Here in this country, many are paying tribute tonight to Ed Broadbent after news the longtime former NDP leader has died at the age of 87. From 1975 to 1989, across the tenure of 4 separate prime ministers, Broadbent pulled his party to the left, putting it on the electoral map like never before, and with a smile and good humor often looked like he was having fun doing it. Hannah Thibodeau shows us his life, his impact on Canadian politics, and the lives he touched in Ottawa and beyond.
He was the type of politician Canadians felt they knew on a first-name basis. Ed Broadbent first ran for the NDP in 1968. He became leader in 1975. He moved the NDP to the left, and the NDP moved up in the polls. The 1988 election was a campaign fought over free trade, and it pushed Broadbent's NDP to the brink of a breakthrough.
Canadians are not about to build a Canada on the values of John Turner's vision of Bay Street as a replacement for Brian Mulroney's Wall Street.
Opinion polls prior to the election suggested the party was surging. At the time, Broadbent became the most successful NDP leader in history, with 43 seats. But he fell short of his own high hopes. There had been an expectation the NDP would at least become official opposition.
After an election, I sit down and I am with my wife here, and we think of what is good in terms of our personal life, what is good for my party, and what is good for my country.
The next year, Broadbent stepped down as leader.
Ed Broadbent was a giant on the Canadian political scene.
Broadbent faced off against 4 different prime ministers. Brian Mulroney was one of them.
He was dignified, and he was a humanist.
Jean Chrétien recalled working with Broadbent when he was a cabinet minister.
We had tough differences, but it's like playing hockey. You know, you can go to a hockey game and you can bum a guy in the ramp or be bumped after the game. You can have a beer together.
After more than a decade outside of the House of Commons, he was lured back by Jack Layton.
His service to this country was always focused on strengthening communities, on bringing people together and believing in what Canadians were capable of.
He never stopped caring about people, about the movement, and that's a big part of why he is someone that I'll always remember. I am sad today that he has passed.
The NDP continued to turn to Broadbent for advice about the party he devoted so much of his life to. Hannah Thibodeau, CBC News, Ottawa.
Chief political correspondent Rosie Barton is here. So, Rosie, one of his final interviews was with you in the fall. What do you remember from that?
Adrienne, we talked a lot about social democracy, his reflections on inequality in this country, how the NDP fits into that fight because of a new book that he contributed to. But he had a couple of interesting reflections about the NDP's attempts to work with the Liberals. First, back in 2008, you remember when he was asked by Jack Layton to reach out to Jean Chrétien about a Liberal-NDP coalition. He saw that as a mistake, in part because it gave Stephen Harper's Conservatives an opening to attack the entire idea of coalitions going forward. And he also thought that the current agreement, the supply and confidence agreement between the Liberals and the NDP, might have been a good idea, but it made it difficult for his old party to claim credit for things like pharmacare and dental care while still criticizing the government ahead of the next election.
And so, Rosie, as we just saw, I mean, Ed Broadbent's legacy includes his influence on so many huge moments in Canadian history.
For sure. But his biggest legacy, Adrienne, is really getting Canadians to consider the NDP as a legitimate, viable option in an election, potentially even government. He believed, yes, that the NDP was the social conscience of Parliament, but he also believed that wasn't enough, that this party should form government one day. And fundamentally, he still believed that Canada should have been further along with things like housing, fighting child poverty and equality. This is some of what he told me about that back in October.
So it's not what the country I thought when my early years in politics would be. I thought we would have more equality when we built the welfare state. But in fact, we've had less equality. We've had tax on the equality measures. So it's challenging right now.
He was still fighting for that equality up until the end. We're going to talk more about Broadbent, what he did for the NDP and for Canada coming up on At Issue.
All right, see you soon, Rosie.
Thanks.
Israel will defend itself in court in The Hague tomorrow after representatives of South Africa formally accused it today of committing genocide in its war against Hamas. Central to South Africa's case, the facts on the ground of Israel's devastating 3-month offensive, which, according to the Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry, has killed more than 23,000 people. That's roughly 1% of Gaza's population. The offensive and toll of dead and wounded growing daily. That devastation triggered by Hamas's attack on October the 7th that killed 1,200 people in Israel and the taking of nearly 250 hostages. Margaret Evans has Israel's furious denial and what judges will be looking for.
The International Court of Justice in The Hague.
Please be seated.
Far from the Gaza Strip, but the suffering of the Palestinians trying to survive there, laid out in painstaking detail by the South African legal team arguing that Israel's military campaign in Gaza is being waged with genocidal intent.
Every day, there is mounting irreparable loss of life, property, dignity, and humanity for the Palestinian people.
The UN Convention on Genocide describes it as crimes with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. Israel rejects the allegation out of hand and will answer it tomorrow. The Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, called it an upside-down world. Israel is accused of genocide, he says, while it is fighting genocide. A ruling won't come for years, and legal experts, including Michael Becker, say proving intent is extremely difficult, even if atrocities or war crimes are proven.
That's a distinct question from whether Israel is in violation of the Genocide Convention. But what South Africa is trying to do is show that these things are linked.
South Africa's team is clearly counting on the language of several Israeli leaders to demonstrate its case.
Not Jewish people or Israeli citizens, the government of Israel and its military is intent on destroying the Palestinians in Gaza as a group.
On 9 October,
they gave examples, including this one, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant early on in the war. There will be no electricity, no food, no water, no fuel, he's saying. We are fighting human animals. South Africa also wants the court to impose emergency measures ahead of its decision, including ordering Israel to stop its military campaign. The court has no power of enforcement, but the scrutiny of a watching world is so intense, it doesn't mean an order from the UN's top court would have no impact. Margaret Evans, CBC News, London.
A New York judge will soon decide if Donald Trump must pay millions in fines and be banned from New York's real estate business for life. His civil fraud trial wrapped with a surprise twist. Trump was granted permission to speak, and Chris Reyes was there.
On the final day of a trial that could prove devastating for Donald Trump's business empire, a series of fiery exchanges and a surprise turn as the judge reversed his earlier decision and allowed Trump to speak. Trump delivered the same angry rant he has since the trial began. "This is a fraud on me," he said. "This is a political witch hunt. We should receive damages for what we went through." Claims rejected by New York Attorney General Letitia James after closing arguments.
This case has never been about politics or personal vendetta or about name-calling. This case is about the facts and the law.
Trump and his associates, including his 2 adult sons, are being sued for $370 million for inflating the value of their properties to secure better loans and insurance rates. He also faces a lifetime ban from doing real estate business in New York. After resting their case, Trump and his lawyers continued their barrage beyond the courtroom at one of Trump's Manhattan properties, named in the case for being fraudulently overvalued.
And it's been a very successful building, but it's a shame to have gone through this for years and years and years, and now we'll see if we're going to get an honest verdict.
But for anybody that was in the courtroom for the last 11 weeks, you heard that there was not one fact against President Trump. There was not one piece of paper that showed anyone committed fraud.
Trump's team argued that James is seeking what amounts to a corporate death penalty.
These loans were all good. The banks were extremely happy with me. They still are.
The judge wrapped today's proceedings by acknowledging that this case rests entirely in his hands. He said he'll try to do his best to issue a final ruling by the end of the month. Chris Reyes, CBC News, New York.
Back in this country, millions of Canadians are in the grips of a brutal cold snap from a blast of Arctic air. For many in Western Canada, this is their first real taste of winter. Extreme cold warnings are in place for pretty much everywhere between British Columbia and Manitoba. These temperatures are frigid even for the prairies. In Alberta, temperatures are around -30, even colder when you factor in wind chill. Tonight, the province even saw a new record for electricity demand. For people without homes, this cold, of course, can be deadly. Sam Sampson shows us how they're coping in Edmonton.
Everyone in Edmonton woke up to severe weather, conditions even tougher for those without homes.
I just wish there was more things for people out there for housing and stuff.
Since the start of the year, police and city officials tore down 8 homeless encampments under a court injunction, even in freezing weather. 3 people, including a journalist, were arrested Wednesday for obstructing police during the cleanup of one camp. The city can evict these residents if there's enough shelter space in the city for them. Some take it, some just move along, but that's a temporary fix. The mayor hopes to declare a housing and houselessness emergency in a special council meeting next week to find long-term solutions. Albertans everywhere bundled up against temps below -30 on Thursday, and the worst is on its way.
For example, Edmonton, potentially a low for the city of -40. And then for Calgary, we're forecasting a high of -32 in Calgary tomorrow. So it's been a solid 50 years since we've seen, temperatures this cold.
Most of BC and Saskatchewan are also under extreme cold warnings, but the Arctic ridge pushing this air into the prairies will dip south before it hits much of Manitoba. That still leaves Alberta with at least 2 more days of dangerous cold. Outreach workers say the cold complicates existing issues for those living rough, like the overdose crisis.
The worry is always that the naloxone's going to freeze in this weather, so we're trying to keep them inside of their clothes rather than just laying out. You don't want to try and get naloxone and it's frozen in the vial.
She asks if you see someone lying on a sidewalk, help them, because with this continuing cold, it just takes minutes for your skin to freeze, about the same time it took you to watch this report. Sam Sampson, CBC News, Edmonton.
Canadians hitting the gym may be getting more than just a workout.
So the big problem is the sweat.
Marketplace looks for the germs in the gym and found the worst culprits. Plus, the illegal weapons sold on Amazon and how the company is trying to stop this. And the kindness of strangers to a dedicated employee.
GoFundMe is up to like $452,000, man.
We're back in 2. From brass knuckles to stun guns, a CBC News investigation has revealed prohibited weapons being sold on Amazon here in Canada. And as Angelina King shows us, a former employee says this isn't the first time.
It was a bestseller on Amazon.ca. More than 300 sold in the last month. It's advertised as a camping knife, but it's actually a switchblade.
That's a prohibited weapon.
It appears this buyer knew that, writing, "Somehow this very illegal knife made it to my house, and I could not be happier." The knife was taken down after CBC News contacted Amazon. The company says the seller is now banned. After a customer and a former Amazon employee flagged to CBC News illegal weapons were on the site, we found brass knuckles and several stun guns. Those too have been removed.
I was absolutely shocked.
This former Amazon employee says they noticed a stun gun on the site in October. We've agreed to protect their identity for fear of repercussions to their future employment. They alerted management and it was taken down, but say it was back online days later.
This shouldn't be like playing whack-a-mole.
What could happen if you're caught with it?
You could be charged with a criminal offense, but more than that, the person who is selling or importing this could also face criminal consequences.
Technically, Amazon doesn't import goods, but we still ask the company if it has any legal concerns, given that it facilitates these sales and that it could have prohibited weapons in its Canadian warehouses. The company told me, alongside with banning the seller, if illegal items like that knife are discovered, they contact law enforcement to destroy them. Amazon also said, "We have proactive controls in place to prevent the sale of prohibited products like weapons, and we continuously monitor our store. If we discover a product that was undetected by our proactive controls, we address the issue immediately and update our controls as needed." The Canada Border Services Agency says it's not surprised prohibited weapons are being sold on Amazon.
the ability to conceal small items in that volume of shipments that are coming into Canada is a significant challenge.
Experts say the bottom line is if you're not sure about an item, don't buy it. Angelina King, CBC News, Toronto.
The Canadian Medical Association is calling for immediate action to address a nationwide healthcare crisis. Tashana Reid now with a growing push for a solution.
Facing a record number of patients over the last few weeks, this Toronto hospital is doing what it can to keep wait times down.
I am in a lot of pain. If you ask me from 0 to 10, I would tell you 15.
But after dealing with a severe headache for 24 hours, this man felt the need to go to the ER.
This way?
Now he's facing a familiar scene playing out across Canada, overcrowding and long delays. The Canadian Medical Association is calling for an overhaul to the system, saying ERs shouldn't be substitutes for walk-in clinics or primary care. We are facing a primary care crisis in this country, and we urgently need to find solutions. They say we need more family doctors to help as the situation grows bleaker.
20 hours, 30 hours, 50 hours. I've seen 100 hours, people waiting to get into hospital on stretchers in hallways.
Hospitals in New Brunswick say they've reached critical overcapacity, while in BC, officials say they hit a record number of patients in hospital, more than 10,400 in just one day. Staffing shortages, surgery backlogs, and an influx of respiratory illness are just some of the additional pressures. There were calls to avoid ERs for non-urgent matters in Quebec, but this doctor says that's not the answer.
At the end of it, the wrong people stay away. And telling them to stay away puts them at great risk.
Some solutions are underway. Manitoba's government announced it will phase in 36 new acute care beds starting in March. In Ontario, the health ministry told hospitals to increase staffing by 20%.
We increased the number of available physicians and nurses in order to meet those demands.
After nearly 4 hours, Gabriel Shimada was relieved to see a doctor, something many others are still waiting for. Tashana Reid, CBC News, Toronto.
So it's a common practice to wipe down your kettlebells and yoga mats at the gym, but does that even work?
If you have crevices, it's impossible to be able to get in there.
Marketplace tests the equipment and finds some surprising results. But first, Rosie's here with that issue. So nice to see you.
Hi, Adrienne. We are going to continue the conversation about Ed Broadbent's legacy in Canadian politics and, of course, what he meant to the NDP. Plus, did Ottawa ignore warnings about immigration and its impact on housing and healthcare in Canada? Chantal, Althea, and Andrew join me to talk about that and more.
It is the time of year when many Canadians are heading back to the gym. So this week, Marketplace is investigating what you're really touching when you're working out. Chelsea Agro now with where germs may be lurking and why some cleaning protocols might be missing the mark.
Even if it's been a while, you've probably noticed these signs. But turns out gym goers are leaving plenty of germs behind.
So the big problem is the sweat, okay? Because what ends up happening is it makes it really easy for you to be able to deposit something onto a surface, but also pick it up.
Microbiologist Jason Tetro says the gym equipment we love to get our hands on can be tricky to get germs off.
If you have crevices, it's impossible to be able to get in there.
To see if gyms are doing enough to keep equipment clean, Marketplace swabbed popular pieces of equipment across multiple locations from 3 national chains. The elliptical had the lowest bacteria count of all the equipment that was tested, but our mat results didn't sit well with anyone.
I know I don't clean mine. What's it called? The sponge of the gym.
Every time you get up, it's just like a pool of sweat.
More than one mat our team tested had high levels of staph, which, like the other microbes we found, might not be harmful for healthy people, but could be risky if you've got an open wound or are immunocompromised. To stay safe while working out, Tetro says you have to wait before you wipe.
Every single disinfectant has a contact time that is required.
Common disinfectants like bleach or alcohol solutions need to sit wet for 10 minutes to be effective. None of the gyms we visited had clear instructions explaining those critical wait times. But all of them did tell us they're committed to providing a safe and clean environment for their employees and customers. The Fitness Industry Council of Canada says our results are anomalies rather than a reflection of the industry at large. Still, Tetro says you should always wash up after putting the weights down. Charles Ciagro, CBC News, Toronto.
The Marketplace team also fact-checks the effectiveness of some fitness trends like protein powder and cold plunges. You can watch the entire investigation Friday at 8 p.m. on CBC Gem and CBC Television, 8:30 in Newfoundland. So now let's break down the news shaping our world. It's Thursday, which means Rosie's here with At Issue.
At issue this week, former NDP leader Ed Broadbent has passed away at the age of 87. He led the party to one of their most successful campaigns in 1988, helping present the NDP as a viable option to Canadians and shaping the party for years to come.
His legacy is he never stopped. He never stopped fighting for people. Even while retired, even having started an institute, he was a big mentor to me as the 8th leader of the New Democratic Party. So he never stopped caring about people, about the movement. And that's a big part of why.
So how will Canadians remember Ed Broadbent? What is his legacy in Canadian politics and with the New Democratic Party? I'm Rosemary Barton, here to break it all down tonight. Chantal Hébert, Andrew Coyne, and Althea Raj. Good to see you all in the new year. Glad At Issue is back. So I know we've all covered Ed Broadbent and the NDP in different iterations. I'll start with you maybe, Chantal, on what you think Broadbent's long political career meant both perhaps to the country but also to the party, because it was a significant time when he was the leader of the party.
Yes, the NDP's early leaders always seemed larger than life, and maybe Ed Broadbent is the last of those who seem larger than life, in part because he took a party that was relatively young and I believe was the first NDP leader to try to open the party up to Quebec and vice versa. Yeah. And he worked really hard at it. It didn't produce the results that he would have hoped for. But in the end, I don't think the orange wave would have happened when Jack Layton led the party to a victory in Quebec if Ed Broadbent had not worked so hard at making the party more conscious about Quebec. Mm-hmm. He was also a man of the left. I remember after that orange wave in Quebec being part of a discussion where he was about how Quebecers tend to like centrist parties, and maybe that strong impetus from Quebec would bring the NDP closer to the center, and he was not comfortable with that idea. And it showed when Thomas Mulcair ran for the leadership. Ed Broadbent did not support him, and one of the reasons was that he believed that Mulcair wrongly would try to bring the NDP closer to the center.
Yeah, and he criticized him later too, and in his latest book as well, about the things that Mulcair did wrong for the NDP at the time. Andrew, in terms of the lasting effects that he had, either on the party or the country, or both.
Well, I mean, he took the NDP to heights that it had not previously achieved. He went from, I think it was 17 seats before he took over as leader to 43 in the '88 election, the great free trade election. So he may not have been a man of the center, but he had some crossover appeal. He came after those great orators of Tommy Douglas and David Lewis, and he may not have had their ability to be sort of a spellbinder as a speaker, but he had a kind of a plain-spun decency, a regular Joe quality that belied the fact that he was a serious intellectual. But he could speak in a language that people could understand, could make them feel like their concerns were his concerns, in a way that people could identify with. And for the long time after he left, the party was a bit struggled. It was not able to achieve anything like the same success until, of course, the Great Orange Wave under Jack Layton. So before then, that was the high watermark with 43 seats and 20% of the popular vote. And of course, afterwards, the setting up the Broadbent Institute as a continuing legacy to carry forward some of the things that he cared about.
Yeah, Althea, how about you?
So I'm too young to have covered Ed Broadbent during the 1980s, but I did have Ed Broadbent as a professor at McGill in the early 2000s. And one of the things that I think struck me was that he was, I guess now, a deep intellectual who could verbalize for common people why he believed the ideals that he believed in. But he was also primarily a tactician when it came to politics. Like, he wasn't ready to see the NDP be the conscience of Parliament. He wanted the NDP to win. And it's rare that you have these two qualities in a politician. And frankly, I can't think of anybody in the House of Commons that fits that bill at the moment. He was also a really kind and decent person. And the kinds of attacks that we see now in the House of Commons, you never would have heard Ed Broadbent spew those words out of his mouth, but I also don't think he would have been comfortable being in a place that saw people demonize their opponents in that way. And it's kind of sad that we, I guess, are witnessing in some ways the end of an era. I hope it isn't, but it kind of feels like that today.
Yeah. Chantal?
To be fair, today's NDP in the House of Commons does not routinely engage in demonizing, but also, thinking back to Ed Broadbent, these were the days when the Conservatives and the NDP could find enough common ground that after Ed Broadbent retired, Brian Mulroney appointed him to lead a think tank. I am not sure that something like that could ever happen today with today's Conservative Party.
What about, his, you've all pointed to it, his staunch belief that the NDP had to stay on the left, and to Althea's point, yes, it was fine for it to be the conscience of Parliament, but it also had to be a potential government and able to form government. Do you think that is still where the NDP is, Andrew, or where the NDP should be, given where things are right now?
I don't think it's where it is for certain. I think it's the days when they were dreaming of power under first Layton and then Mulcair are long past them at this point. I'm not sure they necessarily have to be. I think the lesson of the NDP's history is you can have a lot of influence and a lot of impact on Canadian politics without vying for power. That if you have a strong enough message and are prepared to put it forward with conviction, other parties will follow your lead. And I think I wish sometimes people on the right would understand that message as well.
Althea?
I think many in the NDP would like to see it challenge for power and believe it is challenging for power. It just doesn't seem that that's where most Canadians believe the NDP is. Ed Broadbent was a bit radical in his thinking. I think perhaps most Canadians believe in equality of opportunity, but I don't know that most Canadians believe in substantial equality. And that discussion is not a discussion that you actually hear very often from the NDP, even amongst the backbench, though many do believe in those ideals that Mr. Broadbent espoused. I wonder if they spoke more clearly about the vision that they have, if there would be more people that would subscribe to it, young people especially. So I don't know. I think there might be some thinking. Jack Layton for sure followed Mr. Broadbent's thinking, and Mr. Broadbent will probably remember, this may have been already said in the show, but he decided to back Jack Layton for the leadership of the party, even picking him over his friend Bill Blakey, because he believed that Jack Layton had the ingredients that could lead the NDP to victory. And a lot of people initially believed that Jagmeet Singh could be that Trudeau-esque messiah to bring the NDP to the promised land. It hasn't materialized yet.
Okay, last word to you, Chantal.
Yes, but I agree with Andrew about the place of influence. I'm not sure that the dental care program that just got off the ground or the anti-strike breaker legislation, whether you like it or not, would have come to light if the NDP members in the House of Commons were just more liberals instead of being a different party that has some leverage on the government. But that leverage is fragile. And the party is a long, long way from when it came with incite of power after the Orange Wave.
Okay, good conversation. We will leave this part there. Still ahead, though, we'll talk about a new report from the Canadian Press that says Ottawa was warned 2 years ago that high immigration levels could affect housing costs, healthcare demands. Has the government planned well enough for increased immigration? That's next. Federal public servants reportedly warned Ottawa 2 years ago that high immigration levels could affect housing and services like healthcare. In spite of those warnings, the federal government decided to go ahead and increase the number of permanent residents to 500,000 in 2025. The Deputy Prime Minister had this to say when asked about the warning.
We are extremely fortunate as a country that we have the social capacity to welcome immigrants.
So has Ottawa missed the mark when it comes to planning for immigration? Should it have acted sooner when it comes to affordable housing? Let's bring everybody back. Chantal, Andrew, and Althea. Andrew, why don't we start with you on this? I mean, not surprising that you would have these huge immigration goals and that then you would then be challenged with how the system was going to support these people, whether it be the social safety net or affordable housing. A little curious that there was apparently sort of red flags put up to the government and they forged ahead. What do you make of the fact that they stuck with their immigration plans and maybe didn't consider all the fallout or consequences of that?
Well, there's two elements. There's the planned part and there's the apparently unplanned part. So the permanent resident numbers are higher than we've known in the past, but not hugely so. I think the more problematic stuff is the temporary residents that have been at numbers that I'm not sure the government ever anticipated. But that being said, yeah, there's nothing wrong, in my opinion, with having higher levels of immigration if you also are taking care of the supply side of the equation. If you're talking about, if you're going to have that much labor supply coming in, you better have higher levels of investment than we've had. If you're going to have that much demand for housing, you better have much higher supply of housing than we've had in the recent past. The two things go together, and I guess my problem is not so much that they've let that level of immigration in, but it's exposed the damage of our bad housing policies and bad investment policies. If we had housing at levels that we had in the 1970s, and it continued that, if we hadn't tied the housing market up in knots all those years, we wouldn't be having a housing shortage even with these levels of immigration. If we had more pro-investment policies so that we didn't have the kind of slump in investment that we've had for the last 20 or 30 years, then we could handle that on the labor market side as well in terms of productivity. So it's the failure to enact these other policies that I'm concerned about more than the immigration level itself.
Chantal, you want in there?
Still, the federal government has to make decisions in real time. And in real time, the housing shortage had materialized. The investment deficit was a reality. And you're basically saying, we're going to bring people in and then things will happen. And that goes, it's not just housing, it's a demand for healthcare, it's demand for daycare. Go down the list. And at some point, it points to a feature of this government. It is good at announcing measures. It is less good at delivering what needs to be done to take into account the consequences of its decisions. And on this, you find that they have the machinery, the civil service machinery, to know what to expect. This isn't, oh, how could we have seen this coming? It's not a pandemic. It's a government decision. The problem is that the federal government's main job is macro policy. This is macro policy. We're going to let in more people. We have a problem with housing. Should we reconsider? And I agree with Andrew. It's not the decision to have more immigrants. No. It's if you're going to bring people in, can we somehow make sure that it's possible that they have a roof over their heads?
Yeah, because the problem is that immigration was needed, right? For all the reasons that we know, for the labor market, for economic growth, for all those different things. It's just that these other things that you're talking about didn't happen at the same time. So how do you think the government is managing this, Althea?
Well, actually, I worry that Ms. Phelan is wrong, that we don't have the social capacity to accept more immigrants. So far, and I think we've been lucky in this country, we haven't had a very politicized debate over immigration. But it's not just, quote unquote, racists who are going to start asking questions about immigration levels. It's not just about the temporary foreign workers that have come in at the request of private employers. It's the foreign students that we have accepted that have also put pressure on the housing market. It's the increased levels. It's trying to find a doctor waiting 23 hours at the emergency room because there's no capacity. And all of this is, is aggravated because we have a federal system where a lot of the power to address some of these issues lies with the provinces. But when you don't have, enough people in settlement services to accept people as well, it's not just the Canadians who are here who are going to start to wonder, how can we absorb more immigrants? It's new immigrants who arrive here who may feel, quite rightly, I would think, that what they were promised or what they expected is not going to deliver, because it's much harder to get their foot in the door, to get a good job, to find a home they can afford. And so that kind of social contract that we have, or that social capacity that Ms. Freeland talks about, I think it's at risk. And I hope that we don't see politicians exploiting it, but I do think it's a sleeper issue.
I should say,
Andrew and then Chantal. Yep.
Yeah, I've been encouraged, nevertheless, by the absence of a backlash. We're having, at this point, maybe things will change, but at this point, a relatively civilized discussion about should we throttle back a little bit, should we do this, do that. I haven't seen much in the way of really intolerant sentiment, except on the fringes, but I don't think it's gone beyond that at this point. It's much better than it would have been 40, 50 years ago. And I think that's a testament to the fact that we've had sustained immigration over many years. And so, where you find the most intolerance of immigration is when there are places where there isn't very many immigrants. We're in a society now where we're approaching, not far off, where 50% of the population will either be immigrants or the children of immigrants. I think it's harder to gin up a backlash in that kind of society than in a society that's not used to immigration and doesn't have many immigrants in it.
Chantal?
I believe that in the past, the backlashes on immigration were more related to a labor market that featured high unemployment, which has not been the case and is not to this day the case. We're dealing with labor shortages. I do believe there's a backlash. It's not against immigrants, but it is part and parcel of the polls we're seeing about the Liberals, looking at their re-election chances going down the drain. People are, at this point, pointing the finger at the federal government and at governments in general for what they see as the housing affordability issue. And when you look at warnings that are ignored and light statements that we have the social capacity to do this, you kind of think the fingers are being pointed in the right direction.
30 seconds to you, Althea.
I just want to clarify, I don't think it's going to be a backlash against immigrants in the sign of like the racist tone or the anti-Muslim sentiment that we saw very early in Quebec. I think what it is going to be is a challenge to having more and more immigrants come here without having the policies in place. And I think the public is realizing now that the government didn't actually engage in all the responsibilities it should have taken to make that contract something that was fair for everybody.
And you respected my 30 seconds. Thank you for that. And thank you all for that good conversation. Appreciate it very much. Glad you're all back. And now I'll send things back to Adrienne in Toronto.
You bet. Thanks, Rosie. Next, a Nevada man showed off his corporate gift, but the internet was not pleased. How strangers pitched in for something bigger and better in our moment. So this video caught a lot of people's attention when it first came out. Kevin Ford showing the gifts he got from his employer, Burger King, after working for 27 years without ever missing a day. He was happy with what he got, but others weren't. So many people thought what he got wasn't enough, and with the help of his daughter, they changed his life. The kindness of strangers is our moment.
I hope and pray that it's real and I'm not going to wake up from this beautiful dream. I've worked at Burger King for now 28 years, but when it was my 27th year anniversary there, the manager gave me a piece of cake and goodie bag, and I love that.
This is very nice.
I did a TikTok thanking the company, and a couple really months later, I guess somebody on the internet seen it, and they said that wasn't enough. And my daughter set up a GoFundMe to raise about $200, unbeknownst to me, because she wanted me to be able to fly out to Texas from Vegas to see my grandkids.
They shattered that goal within like an hour, maybe.
GoFundMe is up to like $452,000, man.
He's become basically like America's dad. Like, people just love him.
It allowed me to buy a house, a new car. It's saving not only me, but my generation. And you're gonna make me cry up here. It's absolutely beautiful. It's a dream. It's a miracle is what it is.
You know, Kevin is a very special guy. He genuinely appreciated the first gift he got, but he also said to us that he's not stopping working at the Burger King. He still shows up there. He plans on being there for the next 7 years because he's got to work. From all of us at The National, thank you for being with us. You can watch anywhere, anytime on the free CBC News app and subscribe to The National's YouTube channel. I'm Adrienne Arsenault. Take care.